Well, this is Matt Castro with the Partners and Citizens podcast. In this episode, I am joined by Michael Ebbs. He's a good friend, and he is a fellow lover of politics. And we are in this episode talking about inflation and the big, beautiful bill. Now, this was recorded prior to the passing of the big, beautiful bill. But we do get in a little bit about that, and I hope to have Mike back on in the coming weeks to discuss the aftermath of the big, beautiful bill. So please enjoy. Okay, I am Matt Castro, and this is the Partners and Citizens podcast, and this is a new episode, and today we're going to talk about some political stories in particular, and again, the concept coming from the book of Philippians, speaking about partnership, which really see with missions, partnership in the gospel, but also Paul talks about citizenship in heaven, and citizenship is a political term, and so it does get into the idea of politics. And anytime we think about politics, it's really just people interacting publicly. And one of the issues going on right now has I think taken up a lot of President Trump's 100 days is tariffs. It's been kind of the thing he talked about the most. One of the biggest things he talked about the most in his campaign. And then now that he's been president since January, he's talked a lot about tariffs. And so I'm joined by a good friend, Mike Ebbs, and who has he loves politics. We've done a podcast about the election. That was the last time we were together and talking, and we were able to really kind of find a moment to be together to talk on a late Wednesday after church, which we did.
Glad
I think
to be here.
The last time we talked. Yeah. Just to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and your family.
Yeah, my name's Mike Ebbs, married to Heather. I have 3 kids, 2 in college, 1 going into the 9th grade, and I work at UT Health Science Center, the Med District, and I've been in Memphis for about 10 years now. So.
And how long have your family been at Central Church?
I'd say almost 10 years.
Wow.
A little bit after we got here in May of 2015 we visited several churches, but by the end of 2015, we started attending Central. And
y'all, if you remember, y'all moved to Memphis from California?
Southern California, Los Angeles area, and where I worked at Pepperdine and University of Southern California. So it's been an interesting journey here to Memphis, but we love it here.
How would you compare the politics on the West Coast or the left coast, and really the politics or just the political views here in Memphis, or just even Cairville, which is different than Memphis, obviously?
I would say pretty divergent.
Right.
Obviously, California is very left-leaning, sanctuary cities, DEI is front and center. You have your conservative enclaves in Southern California, but in general, the state is super Democratic, super majorities on the Democratic side in the House and Senate there, whereas here in Tennessee, more conservative. Memphis, obviously, a little more liberal than most of Tennessee, but, Collierville is pretty conservative as you can get, but in super majority on the Republican side here in Tennessee. So it's been an interesting experience living there and living here, and it couldn't be more different in a lot of ways, but yet the same in some ways.
So when you think about, again, you have an interest in politics. Not everyone does, but one of the people I do that does have an interest. Where do you typically get your political information? And obviously, a lot of us we're readers. We're kind of, yes. I don't know, newspaper rats or newspaper. Where do you get your political content?
Well, I'd say a mix of traditional media and just podcasts of people that I like to listen to. Like I love the Wall Street Journal. I'm a big fan of the Wall Street Journal. And then USA Today and other sort of sources. I'll read some things there, but then I like other sources like Shapiro is another one that I listen to quite a bit. Just general podcasts in general. So I like to mix it up a little bit.
So as we're thinking about like what should we talk about, we've kind of been, and I said, and again, I think any type of economic issue like tariffs, it's a little more simple when you're like, oh, Russia's a bad guy or China's a bad guy. It's really simple to think about those international terms like, bad guy, good guy, we're a good guy, they're a bad guy, let's go that's simple. You understand that. Tariffs are economic. They're not necessarily missiles and warships and tanks, but it is as we say, trade wars. We use that term. We use trade and then war. So it's not war with bullets, but it's war with trade and taxes, and tariff really is a tax, and against another country.
Yes.
And so tariff has really kind of become a prominent term and word in Trump's first 100 days. So when you think about Trump's view on tariffs, what's been your kind of reaction and response to it?
Yeah, I have a couple of responses. He ran heavily on tariffs,
right,
in the election, and certainly he really picked out a few countries in general, China being on the top of the list. But the interesting thing is also Europe as well. Those two areas have been high on his list. And so, what is a tariff? It's really a tax,
right,
on the import of that good or service. And so, of course, he's gone full in on this tariff war, I would say. But the interesting things, he's implemented a lot of things. He's said a lot of things, but at the last minute, he's pulled back when some of these have gone into effect. But it's really caused a sort of a whipsaw, I would say, in terms of the Dow. It's really been reacting quite extreme, because it's an emotion-based system. It's people. At the end of the day, it's people executing trades, and it's based on emotion, And so the news of the day sort of wins out. When something gets enacted, the Dow plummets 600 points. 2 weeks later, he backs down and it goes up another 600 points. So you've seen a lot of back and forth there. But, I think in general, we've had a trade imbalance that has grown over the years. But instead of really looking at a targeted approach to how do we resolve it, he's just going full blanket on the tariffs. And I think that, to me, is not a great approach to fixing a problem.
And from your understanding, what, for people who are listening who may not understand, like, what would be the advantage of a tariff? Because again, if you think about it, if you're importing a product from another country that's going to be sold in the U.S., well, if you tax it, it will cause the price of that item to go up. So therefore, the consumer will have to pay for the tariff. Well, then why would any elected official want to tax a product that we desire to buy?
So the entity in the U.S. that's importing that good pays the tariff, which in theory would be passed on to the consumer eventually at some point. And so what we're seeing on some of these tariffs is some companies saying they're not going to pass on in the near future cost to the consumer, but I don't know how sustainable that is in the long term. The goal of the tariff is obviously to redirect purchase of those goods in America, locally. So where that can happen, I think it would be quite effective. But obviously, we don't produce everything in America. And so in those cases, I do worry that with this approach, where it's so blanket in nature and not targeted, it will cause more ripple effects than in the long term.
Because, if you think about, a car in particular, you have a lot of different parts. And material that are used to build one vehicle. Even if the vehicle is built in the United States, it doesn't mean the steel came from the U.S. It doesn't mean that the plastic was manufactured in the U.S. Whatever company is building the car, say it's Ford or Chevrolet or Toyota, they're trying to buy materials, at a reasonable price to then build their car to be able to sell to the consumer at a price that the consumer is willing to buy it, and then they receive as much profit as they can get in the sale of the item. And I think there is a in a somewhat of a nuanced, complicated nature, even to the manufacturing of one car, that's not so simplified into every part that is used to make the car should happen in the United States, so that it's completely manufactured in the United States.
I just think those days are over. If you think of what really powers a car today is based on chips, right?
Right.
For every sensor, every little gadget in your car runs on a chip.
Right.
And most chips are now, where are they built? They're not built in the United States. They're built abroad, Taiwan, China, other areas. And so I think what they're trying to do with this CHIPS Act that was passed within the last year or so is to make, well, it's actually passed under Biden, is to bring more of that onshore. But again, infrastructure-wise, we don't have that capability. And so when I think of a car and tariffs and the components that comprise making that vehicle, in the long term, I can only see prices increasing over time. There's no choice, I think.
And there's an assumption that if it's fully manufactured in the U.S., that means all the employees in that manufacturing were American. Therefore, they're receiving all the salary,
the benefits.
Yeah. But that's also assuming that the company is going to raise wages to meet increased price. And as we've seen historically, even though the last several years, wages haven't really kept up with inflation. And so there's a byproduct of like, well, if prices increase and wages can't keep up, then people are going to be in some ways pushed out of the market for a lot of different products.
That's right, because they won't be able to afford the very products that are being made here in the United States. And so, again, there's multiple things that have to align for this sort of strategy to work. And really, historically, we've seen tariffs broadly don't work as well as most politicians think. Even if you look back historically, they just don't do it.
We're going to bring up this, but I was going to ask as a way to introduction. I don't know what you identify yourself as, but I actually do identify myself as like kind of a globalist, like politically. That's why I've always kind of been a Republican, because Republicans were always the trade party.
Yes.
And we were always, in some ways, Republicans were the globalist party, right? We weren't the protectionist party, which were Democrats. And there has been a flip, and not actually in a lot of ways. I think Democrats primarily are actually protectionists as well. But really, when it comes to like historical Republican or historical conservatives, they've always been kind of free trade. The view was when countries traded with each other, they're less likely to go to war with each other.
That's right.
That was kind of the viewpoint. So the Republican Party really has adjusted. And so, and one of my biggest kind of beefs with President Trump really is on this topic of trade in particular. And so that's one of I think my biggest rub with him. And so I don't know where you fall on that.
Well, I consider myself a Republican. I voted for Trump. And so now 100 days plus, I think there's some things that he's done that have surprised me in some degree. Mm-hmm. I think the extent of this tariffs have surprised me. Just something, I'm working higher education, some things that have disrupted higher education has really surprised me, especially
just recently in particular.
In fact, where I work, we're highly reliant on NIH grants for research and some of the activities that have happened there, and then other areas such as visa, the visa issue, because we have a lot of foreign students, a lot of foreign graduate students, and really the stance there, potentially pausing new visas. They've revoked some of visas, and it's just been a very chaotic environment. It's like every day is a new day when it comes to executive orders and understanding them.
And especially in your specific world, being in university settings, and the things you speak of, especially for me, where I tend to have resonated is international students. And one of the things that maybe some people don't realize is America, while we are, great in a lot of things, I think that's one of the major ones. America is like leaps and bounds better than the rest of the world when it comes to universities.
I agree.
It's like, it's not even,
it's not close.
It's not even close. And so foreign students trying to go to American colleges, it's like they really desire to come to the U.S. And some views is like, well, isn't that meaning that they're taking a spot Americans take it? Actually, and you probably can speak into this, they actually help to make universities more affordable for the American student because they don't give financial aid to international students.
Yeah, there's an economic model surrounding foreign students, especially when I was at USC on the West Coast.
Right.
Obviously, tuition at the USC runs $50,000 a year. Now, no child pays that much because there's tuition discounting. A part of the tuition that goes in goes right back out as financial aid. But to really make the model work, you need a nice chunk of your student body to be foreign students paying full freight.
Right.
So it's a whole economic sort of business model of how universities operate, and foreign students are a big part of it. But they also go into degree programs that, engineering, science, where, there are gaps there with students from the U.S. going into some of those programs that are being filled by those students. What Trump has really done is really weaponized sort of Chinese students, saying they're all spies. That's sort of what he is implying. And there's probably been a few cases of that, but the vast majority of these students are not Chinese communist spies trying to give away American secrets. That's just I've been doing this 30 years,
and in California,
I got to know a lot of students. It's just simply not the case. Most of the students that I know graduated and went back to China or where they were from, and again, I just think that's sort of a straw man argument to sort of really, I don't know, go at China. He's doing that on many different fronts right now with tariffs, students. A lot of it seems to be directed at China right now.
So when you look at the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, when tariffs were significantly levied to protect American farmers and manufacturers during the early parts of the Great Depression, it didn't work. And it caused, in some ways, the argument is the Depression went deeper and lasted longer because of the tariffs.
Yes, it made it worse.
And obviously, it was a lead up to the World War II as well. You've got the fracturing of global trade and tensions like this, and you had this protectionist mindset that led up to during the war. Eventually, the U.S. broke out of that, but it seems like, and you can speak into this, that one of the issues, and I was going to bring up, there's an article in The Economist where someone mentions, I have it right here, that one of the problems with tariffs, and you're trying to protect businesses, is it actually chokes growth and innovation, and especially competition. Because what you're basically doing is I'm trying to limit competition so that the people that I want to win, and I want to kind of push out any other competition. But as we know, especially with America, competition always leads to cheaper and better products.
It fuels creativity.
Right.
Absolutely.
Especially, you mentioned university students, and there's some gaps that will also hurt innovation if you have gaps, especially in science and engineering and mathematics and other computing type of fields. Especially if those who come to the U.S. and then graduate and then actually start living in the U.S. and then actually become citizens of the U.S., then that's a positive. And there's always, as I've read and studied economically, U.S. has always benefited economically when they've been more open with immigration and they've been able to be more competitive. That's always been to our net benefit.
Well, I think in universities where you see things work really well is when there's collaboration.
Right.
And it's across the spectrum with scientists working with each other on common problems, looking for solutions. And so, it doesn't matter where you come from. It really matters how good are you at helping scientifically, advance knowledge. Sharing knowledge has always been a big component of university communities. And so, again, it's collaboration, creativity. Those are the sort of the fundamentals that I think drive innovation. historically in the U.S. And so what tariffs does is sort of chokes off some of those natural collaborations. And so we saw in this example here with this tariff in the 1930s, I mean, it had the opposite impact of what they thought would happen. It actually exacerbated the Great Depression to some degree. Again, I think the tariffs are really being used as a political tool to make some certain political points and really not really thinking about the long-term impacts. And that's what worries me about Trump's strategy that he's engaged in.
Let me ask you this, and maybe it's a way to kind of like close this conversation out, because I think the thought is like, oh, all right, this is all fine and good, but are there any Christian principles, any spiritual principles that come out of this? And one of the things that I think through as I think about this, and I know this, and I've been a lot of places around the world, and I think when you go around the world and you come back to the U.S., you start to realize how kind of blessed the U.S. is. And in some ways, and I could be wrong, it seems as if Americans are saying to the world, I know we're rich and I know we're powerful, but we're not as rich and powerful as we could be. And so here's one of the reasons why I'm a globalist. You think, okay, you build that factory, you build that whatever, that you manufacture that product in another country. What are the benefits? Well, number one, the product is cheaper than the U.S. Second, the people that are working there are now have money. Now they're able to make money to take care of their families. That's less U.S. foreign aid. Countries are able to kind of create some economic growth on their own. And that's a positive and a good thing. And so poverty actually declines globally when there's global trade. I think that's the kind of the globalist mindset. And I think of that as a Christian. I'm like, that's a positive thing. And not to say that all governments are, a lot of times there are governments that, they're corrupt and they end up taking the money from the people. But what ends up happening is the companies end up moving out of those countries. There is a negative when governments are corrupt.
Right.
These companies move out. That's less tax money that they are able to levy. So when you think about the global impact, there's a lot of global positives and benefits when trade is happening globally and not just happening in one country.
Well, I mean, there used to be a thought when you engaged in globalism, it actually, you exported capitalism right to those countries.
Right.
And so maybe some of those countries didn't have a form of government that necessarily we agreed with, but as you raise the standard of living, people may become more educated and eventually change that government over the long term.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why, people thought the fall of the Soviet, communism in the Soviet Union was really more of an economic collapse more than anything, because we were able to export capitalism to other areas of the world as well, sort of as a defense to that. And so, again, I think there are principles there when you can actually make products somewhere else, raise the standard of living in that community or that culture, and over time, I think it rises those, those boats there. It's a tide that lifts boats in other places, which can lead to other things that could happen in those areas long term. Because
the argument has always been like, well, all those monetary funds and these different institutions were all American established, and even the trade rules were established by America to help other countries develop. You think about Vietnam as one country, a country that we actually went to war with, and now is an ally and is now having significant economic growth.
Yes,
and Japan is another one of these. These are these countries that we helped build back up.
That's right.
And we didn't really force them into some kind of trade equality because they would have lost.
Right.
But there's a sense where we have benefited from their growth over time. It's not like we've had like a negative, growth from all these trade establishments. The U.S. has expanded itself, and we have a lot more allies in the world because of it. And you're just wondering, like, from the perspective of the world, what are their viewpoint of an America who's raging that they're not rich enough? I just think that from a Christian perspective, it seems like we're wanting to take back something we think is entitled to us. And I think that's where I kind of come off as like, we established the rules.
Well, I mean, I think there's an argument about a lack of contentment, right?
Right.
In that situation.
Right.
And certainly some of the rhetoric you're hearing sort of adds fuel to the fire, especially from the politicians in Washington today around certain trade and trade inequality. But again, look at something like Japan, who was ruined after World War II.
Right.
We reinvested in them, a very stable government today, a strong economy. I mean, they've had their challenges, no doubt, but
Right.
it's still a world power economically.
Right.
Look at the things we're doing in Vietnam. Again, their form of government is probably something that maybe most people don't agree with. But again, if you look at the ties that have been made over the years and what has happened in that country overall in terms of growth, I think it's undisputable what has happened in that area of the world as well. So,
and I think there's a viewpoint also that the more stable a nation is economically, governmental, the more likely that they're going to not necessarily fully embrace, but at least be open to, Christians and missionaries coming to these nations, and because there's an impact negatively if you don't kick out all minority groups or all religions and say you have to believe this way. It's like, when you go that direction, there's a lot of corporate backlash and all these and it has negative impact on the society at large. So it seems like, again, globalism is imperfect, but it seems like it's a pathway for people to get out of poverty, to be able to feed themselves and take care of themselves, to be more interdependent in the rest of the world, and maybe be open to Western religions like Christianity. Right?
I agree. Yeah, I mean, when I look at other things like USAID, it's been in the news, been around, pretty much tarnished by the right, I would say. And they always pull out the extreme cases where they say, oh, it did this, and this. But there was also a lot of good programs, I would say, that were part of USAID as well. And so, again, I think what you're saying is right. We want to create an environment where you create some stability, where ideas can start being introduced to places that maybe been closed off to them before.
Right. Yeah. Right. And again, I'll say this to correct myself, not to say that Christianity is a Western religion, but most of the missionaries are coming from the West.
That's right.
And that's what I mean that way. Yeah. So there's a sense that maybe if there's more economic stability, then they'll allow, influences and ideas to come in. And so, again, I think that's my tender reaction to the tariffs is kind of more from a globalist perspective, and that's kind of my reaction against it, and not as simply an anti-Trump viewpoint, but more of I think there is a lot of positives that comes with globalism. And I don't know if we have time to talk about this right now because we need to close this down, but there is a sense where this is an example of, and I've read something recently that Congress is realizing that maybe the president has way too much power for that, because constitutionally Congress has the power to regulate commerce and also levy taxes.
But there's also a law that gave him the ability to do tariffs in an economic emergency.
Right.
And so they're debating what is an emergency, because I don't think
Correct.
It necessarily spelled it out. You want to give flexibility to a president, but at the same time, I think there's something going on in the courts around his ability to do tariffs. I think some of them were stopped based over some of the language in the law. And so it's going to be, again, I think it probably gets adjudicated at the Supreme Court at some point, where everything's sort of landing up these days because we just can't figure out how to do anything legislatively anymore.
Right.
That's really the reason we're here.
Yes.
Is that our system is broken, so we can't pass a law that speaks to anything, and so everything ends up in the Supreme Court.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah. I think there's a bill going on in the Senate that's looking to limit the executive branch's ability for this kind of universal tariff. that there's a limit. It's a 40-day tariff for a particular reason, but it pulls back after 40 days, giving Congress more affirmational power when it comes to tariffs because of how it has such a massive impact on the market.
Well, I mean, I think what you're saying is correct. I mean, Article 1 speaks to legislative powers, and one of them is economic, right? Tariffs, setting, spending bills, tariffs, levies, all those sorts of things. And right now, what many presidents have been doing, not just Trump, other presidents as well, they use some sort of escape clause in some piece of legislation to move forward with certain agenda items, and and then it ends up in court or an executive order. I mean, it basically does the same thing. And so where there's hazy legislation, presidents have gotten very crafty and using executive order to push along their agenda, and then it always goes to the courts basically to solve, which is really not a great situation to be in at the moment.
But it is somewhat, in some ways, a quicker mechanism.
Yes.
To limit or to, in some ways, use the word legislate something to either limit or expand something, to provide clarification to something. Right. We are kind of in this situation where the threat of tariffs have such an impact on the market. There's so much multinational interconnection that it's just not helpful as the market tries to at least have a stableness to it, and not to be so rapidly climbing and declining over.
I mean, markets enjoy predictability,
right?
At the core,
everybody, we want all.
We all want predictability, and so what we haven't had those first 4 months or 5 months is that sense of predictability. And Trump is, he's moved back and forth on tariffs, and he's changed his mind at the last minute on some of these things, and hopefully we'll get to some normalcy here soon. And then, of course, we have this big, beautiful bill. That's the next thing.
HR 1, right?
HR 1, which you probably
it'll pass the House.
It passed the House. Now it's going to the Senate. They're going to look at it, make some changes, and it's going to, go forward through reconciliation, and we'll see what actually it looks like at the end of the day. But I do get a sense that some Senate Republicans are not comfortable with the bill and are going to push back. So we'll see how the product looks at the end of the day.
I don't know if because of the tariffs in the courts, there's Section 899 of this bill. Have you read this?
Oh.
Really what they're trying to do is in some ways impact some of these foreign trade issues with the tax code.
Oh, I see.
And try to they call it the revenge tax. So if a country like in France, like France in particular, levies taxes that really that tend to single out American companies, especially Google.
I got it.
And as a tariff, as a tax only on this one product that only affects American companies in particular, that they're going to revenge tax it. And so there's some ways where the administration is trying to find using the tax code as a way to, in some ways get their point across. So
it's going to be an interesting few months, I think. I mean, obviously they got to get a bill passed by September.
Right.
New fiscal year for the federal government is October 1st, and so we'll see how they are able to push it forward, and see if they have enough votes to move the bill forward or not.
Maybe we'll have you back around that time. Let's see what ends up happening next. So